The BattlerGC is the latest Gamecube controller from Retro Fighters. It's almost identical to their previous Gamecube controller, the Blade, except for the location and the size of the D-pad, this being one of the main criticisms of the Blade. If I'm being completely honest, I think the original controller that shipped with the system is awful. Its button layout is bizarre and unintuitive, its shape makes it awkward to hold, and that C button, I mean, what's going on there? It's truly one of the worst controllers ever made. I know it has its fans, but as someone who only got into the Gamecube in the last couple of years, I've absolutely no nostalgia for its quirky design. I'd much rather use something that feels familiar. So when Retro Fighters sent me their latest controller to try out, I was keen to see if they'd maintain what made the original unique, while at the same time updating it for modern audiences. The short version is that the BattlerGC is another mostly excellent effort by Retro Fighters that I can recommend to almost anyone. I say almost anyone because while it is more authentic than the Blade, it makes a couple of not so small changes to the original Gamecube controller's design that might disappoint the purists. And if that's you, you might find that the BattlerGC is still far from the perfect controller. Okay, so let's get the boring technical stuff out of the way first. This is a 2.4 GHz wireless controller. It doesn't have Bluetooth, meaning that it can only connect wirelessly using either the dongle for original hardware or the USB dongle. The dongle for connecting to a Gamecube pays tribute to the legendary Wavebirds dongle, although this one's less than half the size. It's paired with the controller out of the box, making it a simple plug-and-play device. I think they've done a really outstanding job with the design of this. It looks great. Wireless range is about 30 feet or 10 meters, and yes, you can have up to 4 controllers connected wirelessly at the same time, and this is indicated by the 4 little lights at the bottom. I noticed that if you have multiple controllers connected and one of the dongles isn't connected to a controller, it can sometimes interfere with anything that is connected. So you might need to unplug any unused dongles to avoid this problem. The BattlerGC will also work with the Wii, Wii U, PC, and the Switch when docked. For the Wii and Wii U, you can use the same dongle that connects to the Gamecube, although for the Wii U, you'll need to use the Gamecube adapter. For the Switch and PC, you'll need to use the USB dongle, which comes in the box. Battery life is very typical for a Retro Fighters controller at 10 hours, and it'll take about 2.5 hours to charge. You can also charge and play at the same time. On the controller, in addition to the standard buttons, there are a handful of additions. You get a button to activate the turbo feature, as well as plus, minus, and share buttons for use with the Switch. Okay, so what's it like to use? The biggest improvement with this controller over the official pad is the size. It's much wider and feels very different to holding an OEM pad. It's designed to take advantage of the muscle memory you've built up over the last 10 years using modern controllers, rather than your 20-year-old Gamecube muscle memory. I think this is a huge improvement. I always feel like my hands are too close with the original pad. This wider grip is much more natural, and just like the rest of Retro Fighters' range, it's an extremely comfortable controller to hold. The button configuration has remained more or less the same, although because of the shape of the controller, your fingers rest much lower on them. Again, I think this is a welcome change, but Gamecube purists may disagree. The buttons themselves feel pretty authentic. They don't really deviate from the original design, having a similar size and travel distance when pressed. The D-pad and analog sticks both improve on the original pad, although there are a few issues here. Let's start with the sticks. The BattlerGC has 2 identical analog sticks that have a flat design. Having grown up on PlayStation, my preference is always for a dome, which is also what the original pad has. Maybe this is something that Retro Fighters can consider adding as an option in the future. Despite this, I feel like these sticks are a big upgrade overall. Now, the biggest and probably the most contentious change is that instead of the yellow nipple, it uses a conventional analog stick. I personally like this change, although it isn't very authentic. With the original yellow stick, it was easy to quickly flick, which might sound trivial, but in a game like Capcom vs SNK 2 or Smash Brothers, having a bigger stick with more travel distance makes this less easy. There are some games where it's an obvious improvement though, like aiming in Time Splitters 2, so whether you like this change or not will likely come down to the types of games you play. I did unfortunately come across a rather large issue with the left analog stick. While playing Rogue Squadron 2, I noticed that there were frequent instances of stick drift. This makes it virtually unplayable because it often sends you careening off into a wall or into the ground. I haven't run into this problem in other games, so it's not always an issue, and hopefully Retro Fighters can address it in a firmware update. Okay, let's talk about the D-pad. It's pretty similar to an original controller, although it's a fraction larger and it's wider. It's still small and a bit stiff, but not quite as much as the original. I think it is an improvement, although a slightly larger D-pad might have made it even more functional. That said, there aren't too many games on the Gamecube that use the D-pad extensively, and if you want a bigger D-pad or you play a lot of Game Boy games, then you might want to check out the Blade. Another big departure from the original design is the shoulder buttons. The original buttons are unlike anything I've seen on any other controller. They push directly inwards, and at the end of the press they have a pronounced click. The BattlerGC uses modern conventional triggers that don't have the same click. I'm not actually aware of any games that utilize this click, but I thought it was worth mentioning. Otherwise, I think the triggers are a good choice here. I wasn't originally sure about this change, but after using the controller for a number of hours it makes total sense and feels completely natural. And yes, they are pressure sensitive. So one area I felt was a little disappointing, particularly after using the Brawler 64 NSO, is the rumble. Just so you know, I was sent 2 controllers to review and they're exactly the same. It's certainly nice to have rumble included, but I think it could have been twice as aggressive. Compared to the Brawler 64 NSO's customizable rumble, which will shake the fillings out of your teeth, it's a little underwhelming. All in all, I think the BattlerGC is a pretty good wireless modern controller for the Gamecube. It has a few issues for sure, such as having to disconnect unused dongles, and that stick drifting problem really needs addressing. It's also probably not going to be authentic enough for Gamecube aficionados. The changes over the OEM controller are pretty big, which makes it a poor substitute, particularly for people who play a ton of Smash. But with the Wavebird becoming increasingly more expensive and harder to find, this is a great alternative. If you're just after a good quality wireless controller that you can use with a bunch of different systems to play your Gamecube games, then you should definitely check it out.